Well, welcome everyone to the second week of the Land is Not Empty book study. We're glad that you were able to join us here. Looks like we have a few new folks who are on. Before I ask them to introduce themselves, um, I, I'd ask that everybody grab, if you don't have one, a pen and or pencil and piece of paper on which you can scribble a few thoughts and some reflections. And we'll just need that leading into our one-to-ones. Without further ado, I guess I'm going to ask folks, new folks, just new folks, to introduce themselves with your name, any community affiliation, and a few words as to why you're here. We'd ask that you keep it to 60 seconds. So, Don, I'll ask you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, I can keep it to less than that. So Don Mangele, I'm with Spirit of Grace Church. A couple of years ago, we were doing land acknowledgements, and I said, this is crazy just to do land acknowledgements. And I really became passionate about learning more about the natives in this area. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, thanks, Don. And next, Neil. Glad to have you, Neil.
Hey, thank you. Neil Williams. I go by Neil, but I'm John Neil according to TSA and all the bureaucracy that doesn't know who I was for 80 years. So, and I'm a Spirit of Grace member. I'm a Catholic in tradition. So when I was first approached with the question, don't you know what the doctrine of discovery is? I have no idea what that is. So I looked back in my history book authorized by the United States government for the Army, Navy, Marines, and everything during the Second World War. And I found what I thought I would find, the line of demarcation. We had no history that referred to a doctrine of discovery. So I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. So I'm here because it has been very interesting, and I know the roots go way back and the problem is huge. So it will be interesting to go along with all of you.
Thank you, Neil. Great to have your perspective, that line of demarcation. All right. How about Bonnie? We're asking folks to introduce yourself with your name, community affiliation, and a few words about why you're here. Let's see if we can unmute you, Bonnie. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Bonnie Owens, and I'm a member of Spirit of Grace. And I'm blessed to be a member of Spirit of Grace. And I'm here because I never knew growing up what was being done and what has been done to the indigenous people over all the years. And I'm appalled at, well, I think my first big awareness was when I saw that movie with what's that actor's name? I can't remember the name. It was a big movie a few years ago, Snow something. Kevin Costner, he played a military soldier. Janet, you're saying it, but you're muted.
Dances with Wolves?
Yes, Dances with Wolves. I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times because we have the video. That was probably my first awakening to what had actually happened. I grew up thinking all the Indians were vicious and bad, and just like all the stories said. And I remember when we were moving from Ohio to El Paso, Texas, my grandmother was driving me and my sister there in her car, and we went through New Mexico and went through an Indian reservation called Mescalero Indian Reservation. And my grandmother was a bigoted person, and she said some really negative things. And I was probably 5 years old, and I just remember it hurt my heart to hear her
Mm,
talk
mm.
negatively like that.
No, thank you for sharing that, Bonnie. It hurt your heart. Wow.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. Such empathy. Thank you. Jenny, if you could introduce yourself with your name, community affiliation, and
Weren't we just doing people that hadn't done it last?
oh, Jenny, I lost track of Jenny. Thank you. Thank you, Janet.
I think everybody else was here last time, if I'm not
Except
mistaken.
except for
Oh.
Robin.
Oh my gosh, yes, definitely. But let us know if I'm mistaken and somebody else wasn't here.
Robin Hartwig, blessed to serve as pastor with both Spirit of Grace and pastor organizer with Eco Faith Recovery. And this is an amazing opportunity. And I'm so grateful to Scott and Janet for their willingness to organize and lead us. And so excited to see so many people. I was babysitting niece and nephew last week, so sorry I couldn't make it then. Looking forward to getting caught up.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm now going to turn it to Janet for our spiritual grounding.
Right. Well, I'm curious, how many of you noticed a New York Times article, or, well, it was probably through a lot of news outlets that came out around January 26th about the fact that the American Museum of Natural History is closing its 2 exhibits on Native American peoples. How many of you saw that or heard about that? So, huge, big deal. Many of us have probably been to that museum. So for them to completely take all of those exhibits offline is a big deal. And there's a New York Times article. I'll put the link in the chat for you that goes into kind of what's going on with that. And that is the background to our spiritual grounding today, which will be a poem. But I just wanted to share a little background there, which is that there are new federal regulations that have been put into place through the Biden administration, which are designed to hasten the return of sacred items of cultural and historical significance, sacred significance to tribes and Native nations. And they've given institutions 5 years to prepare all human remains and related objects for repatriation and giving more authority to tribes throughout the process. And you may have heard of the passage in 1990 of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA for short, which started this process of returning these sacred items to tribes. Now, you may know, not surprisingly, these items had been taken, perhaps outright stolen, perhaps sometimes purchased, but not under good conditions by anthropologists, collectors, and other folks, non-native people, without proper consent of the nations that they belong to throughout, especially the 19th and 20th centuries. My understanding is some items may go back on display after proper consultation with the tribes. But the important thing is consent. And many of these items are going back to their home territories and people. So this is a poem as our spiritual grounding from this book, Living Nations, Living Words. And this poem is by Suzanne Schoen Harjo, and it's called Welcoming Home Living Beings. Today we welcome home beloved living beings. No one alive today has seen them at home except in dreams. No one we ever met saw them at home except in dreams. Yesterday they were stolen many generations ago. Yesterday they were prisoners in private houses. Yesterday they were locked in university basements. Yesterday they were poisoned and smothered in museums. Yesterday they were branded with numbers and price tags. Yesterday they were violated by prying eyes and hands. Yesterday they were tortured and deprived of all that nourishes. Yesterday, they were alone, many generations ago. Today, we welcome home beloved living beings. They come home to us, their many relatives. They return after surviving a long, hard war. They were never meant to be warriors. They were created with holy purpose as teachers and doctors, as visionaries and guides, as children and parents, as artists and lovers. They were created to balance our minds, to settle the spirits, to solve difficult cases, to make a peaceful way, to make themselves beautiful. They were created by creation and loving human hands, as pots and baskets and boxes, as claws and feathers and teeth, as hides and furs and antlers, as hooves and shells and baleen, as pouches and bundles and gourds, as drums and rattles and bells, as clay and cedar and paint, as grasses and reeds and pollen. Today, we welcome home beloved living beings. We, their many relatives, have known them all our lives. We, their many relatives, have missed them all our lives. We feed their memory with sacred foods. We nourish their memory with sacred waters. We keep them in our circles. We seek them in the darkest places. We sing the songs they sing. We dance the dances they dance. We pray the prayers they pray. We dream the dreams they dream. Tomorrow, after we welcome home our beloved living beings, it will be as if they never left home or us, their many relatives. It will be as if they never left home or us. It will be as if they never left. It will be as if they never, it will be as if, it will be as if there were no yesterday. It will be tomorrow.
Mm.
So I'd like to just invite a brief moment of meditation to offer respect to these sacred living beings and the peoples from whom they were taken, and to try to imagine what it would be to have a worldview that allowed you to see these items as beloved living beings.
Mhm.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Moving to I guess you could say an item of follow-up business from last week. I'm going to just briefly screen share with you our final guidelines that we came up with through our discussion process. So I'll be doing that here, sharing my screen so you can see it. Oh, it's not there. Hold on a second. Okay, here we go. Okay. Sorry for the distractions. Let me clear out of this other stuff. Okay. Are you able to see these? Okay, great. So just quickly, this is what we've agreed to together. We're following Eric Law's respectful communication guidelines to R, take responsibility for what you say and feel without blaming others. E, use empathetic listening. S, be sensitive to differences in communication cultural styles. P, ponder what you hear and feel before you speak. E, examine your own assumptions and perceptions. C, keep confidentiality. And T, tolerate ambiguity, because we are not here to debate. There are no winners or losers. And then from the wisdom of this group, we added some things that we agreed to collectively last week. When telling a story or sharing an experience, avoid using terms that are derogatory to other groups. And I won't go into that. The rest of that, you can read that there, just giving an example. Give you a second to read that. If you do find yourself offended or hurt by anything that someone says, please put something in the chat, or perhaps more helpful, use the raise hand feature on Zoom to indicate that you have been offended or hurt by something that was said that you need to bring to the attention of the group. I would suggest that we interpret this guideline not to suggest that you put the content of what offended you in the chat, because that might feel very impersonal or not very helpful. But you could indicate in the chat to alert the facilitators that you need to bring something forward to the group, or you can use the raise hand feature so that you can share your concern. Also, let's follow the step forward, step back principle, meaning if you tend to talk a lot in groups, hang back first and see if others have something to say. If you're shy or introverted and tend not to speak much in groups, strive to step forward more and make your voice heard. Finally, when we are in breakout groups, make sure everyone gets a chance to share once at least before anyone shares a second time. Okay. Can I just have a thumbs up if that looks good still to everybody?
Mhm.
We're good on that?
Mhm.
Excellent. Ginny, you good? Okay, just checking. All right, great. Thank you all. And I'm going to turn it back over to Scott now.
All right, great segue. Speaking of breakout groups, we are now about to break into one-to-ones. Frankly, we didn't completely think this through, so there are some of you who are couples here. You may end up in a group of 3 or 4. We're not going to ask Robin to figure all that out. Just do the best you can with your time, and follow our guideline to let everyone get an opportunity to speak. You're going to have about 10 minutes in your one-to-one total. And before we do that, what I'm going to ask you to do is take a few minutes to write down some reflections about what came up for you, or what ahas what came up for you while you were reading this week, or what did you discover while you were engaging in any of this week's reflections or action practices. So we'll take a couple minutes to do that. I will give Robin the heads up as to when we're going to go into breakout groups. So just take a few minutes to write independently at this moment.
Mm. Mhm. Mm. 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 Mm.
All right, Robin, why don't you go ahead and put us into our breakout rooms?
Absolutely. And Janet, for some reason, you're too powerful. I cannot assign you, so you need to assign yourself to room 9 with Dennis Bell. Enjoy your conversations, everybody. Can you, you're on mute. Can you assign yourself?
I'm just trying to figure out how do I do that. Oh, so I made you the host, so I don't know.
I don't know why I can't see you to assign you. I could pull all of it on pulled back
Ooh.
to. And you see breakout rooms anywhere?
No, because I made you the host.
Oh, shoot. Okay, I'm gonna pull Dennis back and you guys can talk in the meeting room.
Okay. Hi, Dennis. We had a little trouble getting in the same room. Sorry about that.
I love Zoom.
I know, right? Oh my God.
There are times when I was signing in, it said you need to update. I said, okay, fine, update it.
Now? Oh my God.
No, we can't.
Oh,
I tried it twice.
oh no.
Twice it said, no, we can't. I said,
Oh
fine.
no.
So then it said, well, you can give us some feedback. I said, okay. And so I went to try to do the feedback. It says, so a place to give feedback. So I said, fine. So, I just muddled
I
what's
know.
going on now.
I know. Sorry about that. Oh my gosh.
Happens.
Oh, well, were you able to do the reading or do any of the suggested action reflection items this week? Uh-oh, you froze. Oh, you froze up.
Yeah, I know. We're out here in the hinterland, so
Oh, okay,
even though
now
we have Xfinity, but
it's better.
it's annoying sometimes.
Yeah,
I got through chapter 2. I haven't gotten a chance to get through chapter 3.
okay,
And
all
other
right.
than that, I did find it interesting when reading the book. When I went to chapter 2, I'm going, wait a minute. It wasn't until I got to the end of the second or third page that I realized that it was writing in her journal from 14 years ago. I thought that was a follow-on to the book itself. I thought that was quite interesting, and it was quite interesting when the indigenous lady says, "Well, can you help?"
Yeah.
She said, "Yeah," and that was and then 14 years later. So
Yeah, she put her on this, the native lady
I'm gonna,
put her on the spot, didn't she?
yeah, she did. It was quite interesting. When you have the chance, and I know you and Robin are very busy,
Mhm.
we stumbled upon a YouTube video from a gentleman, I can't think of his name. It was talked about how the Guyanas came to be.
Oh,
And
interesting.
he spelled it Guianas, not GUI, but Guianas. I'll have to look
Okay.
up the name of the author, but like say, we watched it probably last Wednesday or Thursday, and the only reason I know about the Guyanas to begin with is because I was a stamp collector in a
Oh, interesting.
former life, and so that's how I learned about the Guyanas and the
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Dutch, French, and British is what I know about. So
Right. Yeah.
other than
And I
that,
had this vague understanding of they're up there sort of near Venezuela, aren't they? And above Brazil.
yes, and there is
Yeah.
there's a huge, for lack of a better term, fight going on with Venezuela. They want to take over a good part of British Guyana because there's oil there.
Of course. Oh my gosh. Isn't that
Yep.
the story?
Yep.
Wow.
That's what's, yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
So yeah, I couldn't remember what I read in the book, but I just remembered that came across my radar
Yeah.
in the last couple of weeks about the fact that Venezuela wants to take over this territory.
Oh,
And like I
interesting.
say, the Guyanas, how they came to be. Apparently, um, they the Spanish and the Portuguese were in there first. Then apparently the British, Dutch, and French followed
Oh, that
them.
makes sense. Yeah,
And
that
then, of
makes
course, the
sense.
Spanish part became Venezuela. And I guess part of it became Brazil too, because it's Portuguese. So like I say, but it was quite interesting when they talked about the fact that the Dutch were a seafaring nation, and the fact that
Yeah,
they were all over the place. The Dutch
right,
East Indies
right.
Corporation and everything like that. So
That's right.
yeah,
That's right. Mm. Well, one of the things that struck me in chapter 2, and she mentioned it a couple of times, which was super helpful to me actually, is she talked about both in her visit to Guyana and then also in her experience on the Yakima reservation where she and her husband moved, of finding herself, and she herself is indigenous, although she wasn't really raised indigenous.
right. I remember that
So I
now.
think, I'm sure she's kind of gets at this a little bit, that like she herself like is kind of in between worlds, right? And so, but the fact that she herself was finding herself having judgments and assumptions about what it means to be indigenous and how Native people should act, and kind of feeling judgment or almost shame because she herself is now claiming her indigenous identity when the chief in Guyana was drunk and throwing the beer can out the window, and then on the reservation when there some of the neighbors don't have the trash picked up and stuff like that. But then like it was kind of an aha moment for me about the privilege of being able to pay for garbage service. And that, because I've been on native reservations and seen some of that. And I never really thought about like why, but that it is actually a privilege to be able to pay to have your garbage carted
Yeah,
off.
yeah, I agree.
And of course, just all of the other ways, and I mean with the chief in Guyana, I mean just the ways in which Native people are dealing with so much multi-generational trauma and stress. So addictions are not uncommon. And I mean, it's a complex situation, but to be reminded
Very
to,
much so.
and and then the other thing about not expecting every indigenous person to represent the whole, you know.
Right.
So of
Yeah.
course, somebody may do something you disagree with, but that doesn't mean they reflect on all Native people. So I found
Right.
those kind of insights useful for me.
You talk about the garbage pickup. A number of years ago, we went to Glacier National Park.
Yes, uh-huh.
And of course, on the eastern edge of Glacier is the Blackfeet Nation.
Yeah, we did
Yeah.
that too, and we went on there too.
And what was interesting was we chose a guide from the Blackfeet Nation, not
Oh,
from the western side, but from the eastern side. And we actually stayed in their hotel
oh
next to the
wow.
casino.
Cool.
So yeah. And we took the road to the sun with the Blackfeet person. And
Whoa, I
also
didn't
they
even know
took
you could
us
do that.
they took us through a good part of their area that they live in. And once again, like you say, it's not very well kept up.
Yeah,
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 and I'm going, but it was
yeah.
interesting. They had a gas station and they had a Subway.
Uh-huh.
And we also went into what I guess I'd hate to say it, but it was a trading post. And so we went in there and, found some stuff in there. So, I mean, yeah, but we were pretty much being very touristy when we were there. So, but it kind of opened my eyes. I mean, they talked
Yeah.
about the people herding cattle and things like that. So it looks like we're back in the main group.
Oh yeah, we are in the main group, Dennis. When Pastor Robin couldn't get me into your breakout room, she brought you into the main room. So it
Okay.
looks like our time is up, but it was
Okay.
nice talking with you. Thank you so
Nice
much
talking with you,
for
Janice.
sharing that. Yeah.
I think the countdown timer is running on them, so they'll probably all be popping back
Yeah.
shortly.
People are gonna start popping back in, I'm sure.
Robin, what part of the coast is that?
Yeah.
Great question. Janet, where were we when I took that picture? I can't remember, sorry.
It's probably Cape Lookout, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure.
I
That's
was
what
gonna
it
say,
looks like. Looks
Oh,
like
yeah?
Cape Lookout.
okay, yeah.
It does? Did somebody say it does? look
Wasn't
like-
a test
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
It wasn't a test question. All right. Well, we are back from our one-to-ones. I hope you had some connecting, nourishing discussion there. We'd like to move on to full group discussion, and we're gonna try to fit in 3 questions here. We'll see if we're successful on that. But by all means, let's have all the discussion that we need on the questions. So if we don't get to 3, so be it. So we want to open with, what did you take away from the story of the author's partially successful and partially ineffective effort to work with other Indigenous people to get the WCC, the World Council of Churches, to take action in solidarity with Indigenous peoples? As you respond to this question, we invite you to share your understanding of maybe 1 or 2 reasons why the program the author envisioned never fully got off the ground, and what you think this illustrates for us about our denominations and their member churches in relation to marginalized people. So I will open the floor to this mouthful of a question. Let's start with, what did you take away? What did you take away from this story that the author shared? Yabka.
Well, it's a real familiar story. In fact, familiar story in that you can see this happening in history all the time. But personally speaking, and I know many of you can relate who belong to Spirit of Grace, that the the ideas of institutions seem to have carry greater weight than the actual needs of the people who are in them. And I'm thinking specifically in what our Church of Spirit of Grace has just gone through after receiving a letter from a bishop that really was quite radical in its statements. And I thought the whole story that she related was very depressing, because I was horrified actually to read, especially Christians would be so dismissive of her and act in an inauthentic way when they were talking to her, but then behind her back were sort of ignoring the whole thing. And I think this happens a lot with people who have no perceived power or status, that our society tends to dismiss them. And I think it's a cultural thing that you tend to look to the big and flashy stuff or the powerful stuff, and you tend not to really give time or create space for the people who you might view as lesser or less important. So that's a few thoughts that came to my mind when I read that passage.
Thank you, Yabka. I appreciate that you point out the reluctance to give time and create space for people. I think in our meetings, we want to cover the agenda. We only have so much time, and that creates we use that pressure as kind of as an excuse. So yeah, creating space. Don. Don, you need to unmute.
Don.
So following up on that, I would agree with that. And at the same time, I think that it's the it's money. That they don't want to jeopardize their funders of the church to go to anything like that. I think it's all power and money. I'm being crass, but that's kind of where I think it's at. That it's not just the meeting agenda and the time that you have, but it's if we bring that up, we're liable to have some problems with some of our member churches.
Neil?
I was really surprised by one of the quote, the ending statements she made or was made, that the churches are institutions and are concerned about their status, their situation, and they were, in this regard, worried that if they bring up political hot potatoes or things that are very complex and depend on change and depend on evaluation of principles and laws and guidance and priorities, that they might be subject to losing their tax exempt status. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. You know, if that's somewhat a concern, it isn't a non-concern, but it shouldn't overwhelm their ability to step in and be involved in this situation, this injustice, this history and what it's brought us. So it's kind of interesting that I never thought of it that way. I'm a member of the smaller churches around here, the Catholic Church. So I figured that the Catholic Church isn't worried about losing their status, maybe, but that might be a concern of institutions of one size or another.
Elaine?
Okay, I think Lori and Mark might have beat me, but I'll say something quickly. I highlighted the part about donor churches from developed nations prefer programs that activities are largely symbolic and intellectual, and it's something that I've seen as I've only become rechurched, I don't know, in the last 10 years or something, maybe less than that, and it seems like it's really, we're all very interested in understanding and learning, and it's hard to move from that into doing. And I mean, for me personally, it's uncomfortable to confront people, and it's a lot more safe to be in a Zoom call and reading a book. So that's what I had to say.
Thank you, Elaine. Just a few key words that I get from your comments. One, how difficult is to move into doing, and second, the issue of comfort. That to me is a big one, the issue of comfort. Lori and Mark.
I just wanted to say, from what I remember about that whole conversation in the chapter, that one of the groups that she went to for real help was the Mennonites. The Mennonites are all about peace, and yet they couldn't take the idea of peace and turn it into something, in this situation with these indigenous people. They were just so focused on their definition of peace. I think we sometimes do that. We tend to, narrow what we think should be done, I guess, and to the detriment of what should be done. So that's really about all I want to say. Okay. How do I lower the hand? There it is. Okay.
Carl.
So I like what I've heard and can identify with it as an individual. In other words, institutions resist change because it's uncomfortable. It perhaps damages relationships. I came into this, I'm really eager to see what comes in the rest of this book, because I presume she's going to tell us what we need to do. And I can buy into intellectually, I know this is all the right stuff, but I guess I'm a little worried that when it comes down to it, the individual call is going to be difficult, and I'm sure it will be. So I'm anxious and eager and a little nervous about seeing what we're going to be called to do, because change is hard. It really is, for institutions and for individuals, even if we think we're fully committed.
Wow, very, very wise, Carol. Nervous about what we're going to be called to do. I appreciate that. I guess I haven't thought that far ahead to be nervous yet, but maybe I should be. Huh? Other comments?
I could add that I was telling Scott that back in the early 2000s, I was actually had the rare opportunity to be part of a theological task force that was accompanying the World Council of Churches, an initiative called the Decade to Overcome Violence, and it was going along with the UN Decade for Cultures of Peace. And it's so interesting. It was a wonderful experience for me. But through it, I did see some of these dynamics. And one of the dynamics that I could see was the sort of privileging of conferences and, programs where you bring people together, especially theologians, people with PhDs or theological degrees, to have wonderful, rich, meaningful conversations. But when there are limited funds, were there better ways those funds could have been spent? Perhaps, I don't know, but also there was a real crunch that was happening in the early 2000s where the WCC was kind of running out of money. And so they were ramping down a lot of programs. So to hear that when she said they couldn't fund this position all on its own, I could actually see everything she was saying and also understand from their perspective, they literally didn't have the money, but why didn't they have the money? So that's the deeper question, right? And why are our churches not being funded anymore, that are the more liberal or moderate to liberal side of Christianity is really been struggling. And I do think it's true that the World Council is primarily funded by the richer European, to some degree, maybe American, but especially European churches. And so we all have blind spots, right? So that's just a couple of comments from my own experience that I could see where she was coming from, and knowing what they were dealing with as well, knowing that they were really they've totally downsized, as many of our churches have.
Thank you, Janet. I also wonder about, Don spoke about money and power. I think there's also a factor about fear of losing membership. And I think that's related, right? Because if we lose members, we lose money. But I was certainly part of this in a church back in Connecticut when we were trying to go through an open and affirming process, where the church really pulled up short of going through the opening and affirming process back in probably the early 90s, because of fear of losing membership. That, God forbid that if we go through open and affirming, Neil might get angry and leave the church, like that we can't have that because Neil is a big contributor, right? That we can't have that. Sorry to pick on you, Neil. Thanks for reading a good sport too. And it really did not work out in the end. We lost people anyway, right? We lost people anyway. We lost the people who wanted us to be open and affirming, and they left. So it doesn't work out. I think we really need to think about being bold here, and that's uncomfortable. That is uncomfortable.
Should we move on to the next set of questions?
Sure, go ahead, Janet. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the next question is going to, it's actually a great follow-on to this question, because both chapters 2 and 3 offered some insights perhaps and some illumination into the connection between what we might call a capitalist mindset and capitalist policies, and injustices done to indigenous peoples. So, you know, why we settler people in the West have bought into capitalism now for hundreds of years, and that comes with certain assumptions, right, about what is civilization, right, and what is a good economy, and what is good livelihood, and what is good use of land. And there's all of these assumptions that come along with that. And so I want to tee off a discussion around that with just reading you the quote from this chapter 2. This is page 51 if you're interested. This is she's talking about the fact that just putting indigenous peoples on reservations didn't do the trick, right? It didn't destroy them, at least not fast enough. And it didn't destroy their culture. And so the quote is, in the words of T. Hartley Crawford, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in 1838, quote, he said this: unless some system is marked out by which there shall be a separate allotment of land to each individual, you will look in vain for any general casting off of savagism. Common property and civilization cannot coexist. And so that was the shot across the bow course that was actually actualized in the late 1880s with the Dawes Allotment Act, breaking up common property from reservations and forcing tribes to lose their communal lands for the most, in many cases, I mean, with small, tiny pieces left, maybe, but forcing them to divide it up among individuals. And so what did you take away, or what do you take away as you think about the connection between capitalism and the injustices done to indigenous peoples that we heard about throughout these 2 chapters, including with the World Council of Churches story and the difficulty taking on an issue that might offend constituencies that those churches serve?
Let me go ahead. Could I address that?
Yeah, jump in.
I just changed rooms because my husband and I are in the same room, so we have to change rooms in order to talk at the same time. Capitalism, oh, I think I'm echoing with Thor. Capitalism to me just goes hand in hand with everything that she's talking about. The doctrine of discovery, it seems like our religion and our government and our business models have all completely converged. And I was just doing another book group earlier today and reflecting that these rich resources that we are enjoying in our country and that immigrants are naturally attracted to, it's all built on stolen land and on stolen labor. Mm. And that makes us, well, extremely capitalistic, but also it's made our religion very corrupt. Mm. And she's speaking to that corruption and to a desire to, let's call it, decorrupt it.
Thank you, Allison. Thor.
Yeah, it's interesting to spark off of Scott's comment about being bold. Today I was listening to a story about San Francisco apologizing to the indigenous population and, well, not people of color, essentially. But the city of San Francisco did a formal apology to people of color for exploitation, whether they were indigenous or Black or, Chinese, and, obviously they had a huge Chinese population. And so they were apologizing, and there was some talk in the city about what perhaps, there should be reparations. And the mayor of San Francisco quickly deflected that and said that reparations would come at the federal level, should come at the federal level, in her opinion. And so this was kind of sparked by what Scott is saying. I mean, that's probably boldly where we need to go, is to figure out what the reparations are going to look like. And it's going to be a huge discussion, and people are going to be beating up on each other and, marching in the streets. But that's the bold solution I would propose.
Thank you. Yes, the whole conversation around reparations is so important and so controversial, right? Very controversial. Thank you. Yapka.
Well, there's so much I would like to say, just a lot of things being triggered here, but first your comment, and I actually read that too in the book about that communal land is labeled as there's no way people can thrive when they have communal land. It just shows the narrowness of vision and the automatic assumption that whatever the powerful, those in power think is the right way to live gets the stamp of approval, and everything else thereby, everything that differs is regarded as not worthy or inferior or whatever label you want to put on there. Just the human tendency, I guess, to other, like if it's not our way, then it must be wrong. The whole notion, if you go back to even the word natives and the primitive people, that speaks of such a worldview of but automatically, we're the best and everybody else is below us. Just that exceptionalism that we seem to be really, our culture really seems to have reinforced that over the decades and centuries, I think, as white people who have become colonialists over history and, are now trying to come to terms with what we have done. I am just really seeing by all the examples she has in her book so far that if there's so many examples, and this is just the tip of the veil. I think if we really studied our own patterns of thinking, of evaluating, the way that we do things as people who are acculturated in a Western society does horrible justice to our neighbor, regardless of who they are, but especially those who are most vulnerable. The example in the book also about the trash, the native person who's going to get a ride, that they were tossing a beer can in the bushes, really spoke to me because I spent a year as a foreign exchange student in New Mexico, and I had occasion to visit the reservations there. You would drive through them or past them, and I always had the judgment of why don't these people just clean up their place? There's old cars and all kinds of junk sitting there, and just her explanation that they probably didn't have money to pay for garbage service was extremely humbling to me, and because I have had that very thought on more than one occasion, and just the ignorance, my own ignorance is being highlighted by all these stories, and I'm really kind of horrified by it, and I think that, and I'm a person who's trying to sort of lift the veil of all these things, but we have such a long ways to go. It's kind of discouraging, actually, to find yourself at this age and thinking, oh, I had this completely backwards, or I didn't see this right, or I was too judgmental, or what have you. There's so much that our culture just trains us completely the wrong way, and we don't even know it. That's the worst part.
Thanks, Yabka. That's so super insightful. I busted myself out to Dennis as also having that insight about having noticed judgment in myself about trash on reservations and not realizing the privilege that comes with being able to pay for garbage removal. So I could relate to that. Elaine, let's let this be the last comment on this question, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes for the final question for reflection. Elaine, go ahead.
I think it's really hard to see the world through other people's eyes, and she's giving us a glimpse into that here. But it also seems to me, and it seemed to me for quite a while, that in order to truly love our neighbor as ourselves, we do have to be able to see the world through their eyes and not with our own judgments.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you, Janet, thank you everyone for your comments on that question. Our final question, I want to ask it a little more generally than it's written here, is what roles would you like the church to see, or would you dream for the church to take to heal, to work towards healing in Indigenous relationships and in our relationships with the natural world? And any thoughts on what's blocking us from taking any of those actions?
I know someone had said earlier about it just seems so big, and I think that's what happens a lot of times. Well, at least for me, as it just and probably for others in the church, boy, that's a big one. I don't even want to touch it. And yet I think we forget, how these things can be broken down, and it can just be, you've got to start with education. People have to understand the situation, but oftentimes from that, there's little movements. I have a daughter that lives up in Vancouver, BC, and I know they're doing some reparation up there with a process of taxing properties, and people can, voluntarily pay some extra taxes that will go toward, I don't know all the specifics of it, but yeah, I think sometimes they just get overwhelmed, and Spirit of Grace is a fabulous place, but there's a million things on the plate there, and we're all trying to figure out, where do I land? How do I land? How do I support the community, but also continue some other things that I've been doing? So yeah, that's a struggle at times.
On.
So following up on that, I think that one of the things that we can easily do is become an ally. And we do that by learning what issues are important to them. For example, when the pipeline is going through sacred lands, and there are all kinds of issues like that that keep coming up, where the sacred lands are being treated as if they're nothing. And so I think that that's an easy way, is to get on email lists so that we know what issues are important to them, and show up for them as a first step.
Carl, then Bonnie.
Yeah, I come back to thinking of what Reverend William Barber has done. He has the Poor People's Campaign with a charismatic leader and pretty specific action items. And I think what we're looking for is something similar. Another marginalized group besides the poor is the Indigenous peoples. And maybe we're looking for the charismatic leader that can actually put all this together. But the things they've been doing in the Poor People's Campaign, I think, are probably pretty good representation of what might work. And I'm not that familiar with exactly what they do, but I think it's a lot of lobbying for political means.
Thank you, Carl. Bonnie?
For a church community like Spirit of Grace, where we do have a lot of fingers and a lot of different pies. I'm wondering if, as Don mentioned, become an ally, but to make any kind of real difference, it seems to me like it would take the whole church community behind it, behind such action. Some kind of agreement and understanding. It may not involve every single member being directly involved, but supporting it in some way. Because we can meet and talk, but until some real action is taken and backed by a lot of people, the full support of the whole community, I'm not sure much positive movement change would happen.
I guess thank you, Bonnie. One thing I like to raise is the work going on with respect to land back. There are a number of churches who are giving property back to indigenous communities for whatever purpose. I believe it's Westminster Presbyterian, I could have it wrong, is doing a land back where they're taking a piece of their property and turning it and donating it for indigenous housing, particularly for families. So just a great example of some land back effort that's being done. And that's a form of reparations that's being undertaken, and something that we can do as churches, particularly as so many of us find that our campuses are too big. Any other thoughts, comments? Yapka.
I think one of the many things that is holding us back is that we're so conditioned to operate in our known systems that benefit the Caucasians and the oppressors, for lack of a better word. And I'm having a real rough time getting my mind wrapped around trying to identify, what the root cause of all this inequity is. And for example, with the whole doctrine of discovery, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could pull a bunch of, law students into ferreting out which contracts in the whole of them. This is grandiose thinking, but still, bear with me for a second. If we could sort of flag every document that's tainted by the doctrine of discovery and rewrite it in a way that does justice to the indigenous people, wouldn't that be wonderful? And of course, that would be a huge undertaking. I understand that is maybe not possible, but I would love to come up with a way to undo that damage, not by doing little piecemeal things, but really getting at the source, one of the sources of all of these problems we have and all these inequities. It just, like reading in the book, it just broke my heart to read that she described how the Yakima Nation had finally secured a contract where they were given the reservation, but they were aware that it would take some time before it was put into law. And this person then invited a whole bunch of settlers in, this kind of thing. This is only one of countless examples of where treaties were completely violated in spirit. And, could we revise our treaties? Could we kind of go through a cleansing process of that? That's what I would love to do, but I see that as a judge. There's roadblock upon roadblock upon roadblock And it makes me feel really like I'm kind of spinning my wheels. I really would like to do this, but I can't do that. But I wonder if we can figure out ways to deconstruct all of that.
All right, thank you, Yabka. Let's wrap it up there. I'm going to.
Pastor Robin had her hand up.
Oh,
also.
okay, Robin. Yeah, this will be the last comment then. Robin?
So much. Wow, what a great conversation and so many layers to it. And it's off of what Yabka said. I mean, the book says dismantling the doctrine of discovery, right? So you think about something that gets built the wrong way and you have to dismantle it, and it's hard, and it's tedious, but like anything we're doing to dismantle is probably helping. And but specifically, I'm stuck on this thing about San Francisco apologizing, but saying, no, it's not on us to do reparations. That's federal. And on the one hand, I get it. But on the other hand, if any group or organization or household feels the need to apologize, why wouldn't there be something concrete that would go along with an apology beyond the apology? And it made me wonder whether every organization, from the household to the national government to corporations, that have benefited from the doctrine of discovery and white supremacy, why wouldn't we all, if we're continuing to economically benefit, which my life is continuing to economically benefit every single day, why would I not be engaged in reparations, not only in some way at the household level and at the church level, but at the city level and the national level? But as Don was saying, to be in relationship with Indigenous people so that it's their desires and the relationship that would guide what that might look like.
All right. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everyone. Janet, can I turn it to you for announcements?
Yes. All right. Okay. So just, I think you all know where we are with the reading, but as I'm putting in the chat here, for next week, read chapters 4 and 5, and then we invite you to choose one of the following, or rather two, if you can, but if you can't, do what you can, of the following. Oh, thank you for putting them in there, Scott. I was just trying to do that. That's great. Of the following options. 1, create a visual timeline of the eras of U.S. Indian policy, with termination being repealed in 1988. Extend the timeline to today. And what would you call this era? Reflect on this timeline, the larger picture of oppressive policies and how it correlates to lived realities of Indigenous peoples today. How are we being invited into justice work? Reflect, journal, and pray on these questions. Yeah, if you just did that, I'm sure that would be enough. You wouldn't need to do anything else other than the reading. That's a big one. The second one is just as Augustine provided an alternative interpretation of a biblical story, the story of the Canaanite woman in Matthew, to resist the narrative of European supremacy. Look for a biblical passage or story that points to a more inclusive world, or that rejects concepts of supremacy, domination, or oppression. Reflect on this intentional practice of reinterpretation. So this is for those of you that kind of like diving into the biblical narrative and texts and playing with that. Finally, at the start of chapter 5, Augustine discusses the impact, which is chapter 5 is one of the 2 chapters you'll be reading. She discusses the impact of Cree elder Stan McKay's advice to seek healing in the sacred waters of her homeland. Think about the physical lands and waters of your homeland and how those physical features help form, shape, and develop you. And that could either be your current homeland or the one perhaps you were raised in. Who are the caretakers of your homeland today? In what ways could you advocate for the well-being of your homeland? Might you find healing through your advocacy? So those are some suggested action reflection items for next week.
All right, thank you for that, sharing that, Janet. Of course, we will send these things out via email as well, so you don't have to hurriedly scribble all these things down on a piece of paper. They will come out via email. I think next week we intend to follow a very similar structure, so you can think about as you're doing your reading and as you're doing your practices, just keep track of what struck you, what really stands out, so that you can go into your one-to-one and share on that. I think I will close with the Eco Faith version of the Serenity Prayer that we do every Thursday morning, inspired by Black author Angela Davis. And you can join me in this prayer and just use whatever name for the divine feels appropriate to you. Creator, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we cannot accept, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And we'll see all of you next Tuesday evening. Take care, all.
And we did the unimaginable. We ended 2 minutes early. I can't believe it.
And I forgot to invite people to a debrief. So if anyone would like to stay on to debrief, you are welcome to do so.
Yes, we call it practice 6 in our Eco Faith recovery practices. And then Rob, whoever's doing the recording, if you can stop it, be great.